She was just 9 years old, alone on a quiet country road, with an old backpack strapped to her shoulders. When she saw the broken-down luxury car on the roadside, she simply thought, maybe that man needs help. She didn't know that the man was a billionaire heir to a hidden empire of power. She didn't know that the ring her mother left her was actually the key to a secret buried for 20 years. And she had no idea that she was at the center of a twin separation experiment where humans were designed like a blueprint. This isn't just a story about a little girl fixing a car. It's a story about how an abandoned child sparked the downfall of an entire empire built on lies. It was a late afternoon in mid-March. The sky above the outskirts of New York was veiled in a soft golden haze, with pale sunlight filtering through bare tree branches. Along the narrow country road leading toward the small town of Harmony Creek, a young girl walked slowly, an old, faded backpack slung over her shoulders, both hands tucked into the oversized pockets of her coat. Her name was Sophie Carter, 9 years old, a fourth grader at Willow Glen Elementary School. Petite in frame, but her eyes gleamed with an unusual light, not the carefree sparkle of childhood, but the knowing gaze of someone who had seen too much, too soon. Inside Sophie's backpack, alongside her school books, was a small cloth pouch containing a toolkit she treasured, like gold, a gift from Uncle Nate, the man who had raised her since her mother passed away. He once told her, "The sooner you learn to fix what's broken, the less you'll need to rely on anyone else." Today, Sophie planned to get home early to help him change the oil on his old pickup truck. But as she passed a thin stretch of woodland road, she came to a halt. Parked crookedly on the grassy shoulder was a sleek black Mustang Shelby, hood wide open. Thin smoke curled up from the engine bay. Standing beside it was a young man in a black suit, tie loosened halfway, shouting into his phone. "No, I don't care how important the meeting is," he barked. "I'm stuck out in the middle of this godforsaken County Road 16, and every repair shop says they won't get here for another 2 hours. What kind of operation are we running?" Sophie stood a few meters away, observing. She didn't rush in. For most kids, this scene might be intimidating. But Sophie was different. With instinct and sharp sensitivity, she sensed something. This well-dressed man had eyes full of unease, like a child lost in a snowstorm wrapped in adult clothes. The man ended the call, exhaled sharply, and leaned on the car, staring into the tangled mess of wires under the hood as if confronting an alien life form. "Excuse me, sir." Sophie's voice was soft yet clear. "Is something wrong with your car?" The man turned abruptly. At first, surprised, then slightly awkward. He saw a girl with an intelligent face, honey-colored hair tied back high, and a faint smudge of dirt on her cheek. Just a minor problem," he replied with a forced smile, trying to mask his helplessness. "It's all right, kid. You should head home." Sophie tilted her head, eyes darting toward the engine. "Do you smell syrup? Like something sweet?" He frowned. "Yeah, actually, yes. How did you?" "Coolant," she said. "Your car's leaking it. Right there." Sophie pointed to a small puddle beneath the vehicle that he hadn't even noticed. He blinked. "How old are you?" "9." She grinned. "My uncle's a mechanic. He teaches me lots of stuff." The man, his name was Ethan Blake, let out a soft chuckle, the first moment of ease he'd felt all day. No one in the city ever talked to him like that, so directly, so naturally, without pretense. "And your name is?" "Sophie. Sophie Carter." Ethan extended his hand out of habit, but at that very moment, his eyes locked onto something. The ring. On Sophie's hand was a vintage ruby ring, the deep red stone set in an ornate gold band. It was clearly too large for her small fingers. She'd wrapped thread around it to make it fit. Ethan took a step back. His heart clenched with the weight of memory. He had seen that ring before. Not at a lavish party, not in a collector's case, but on the finger of a little girl in a run-down playground. Her name was Lily, 15 years ago. And Ethan Blake was the one who gave her that ring as a promise that he'd return. But he never came back. And Lily, she was reported dead when the Starlight Haven orphanage was shut down just a month later. Ethan crouched, his voice trembling. "That ring? Where did you get it?" Sophie glanced down, gently holding the ring finger. The brightness in her eyes faded into something quieter, something older. "It was my mom's," she told me. "Keep it. One day, you'll understand just how important it is." A breeze swept through the trees. Suddenly, Ethan felt cold. Not from the wind, but from a chilling certainty that the world he thought he knew was about to change forever. And the girl standing before him wasn't just a kid who knew how to fix a car. She carried a memory that had never healed, and a truth powerful enough to shake the foundations of the empire he lived in. Ethan stood frozen for a long moment. In the fading afternoon light, the world around him seemed to blur except for the girl's small hand, bearing a deep ruby ring that glowed like a silent flame, burning steadily for the past 15 years. He slowly bent down, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile reality before him. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, his voice low, trembling despite his effort to keep it steady. "Why are you asking?" Sophie replied, her gaze narrowing slightly, guarded now. "It's just, the ring looks familiar," Ethan deflected. "It reminds me of someone I used to know." "Her name was Claire Carter," Sophie said after a brief pause. "I call her Mom, even though I wasn't her biological child." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Claire Carter. That name had never appeared in any of the files he'd seen about the shutdown of Starlight Haven. But if she had changed her name, Sophie went on, her voice growing softer. "She adopted me. She used to say some things were too complicated to explain to a child. But she always loved me. She never made me feel like I didn't belong." Ethan said nothing, eyes following Sophie as she reached into her backpack and pulled out a rag, beginning to rummage through her tools. He still wasn't certain, but everything felt too coincidental. The ring, the name, Lily, the orphanage, and the old guilt that had haunted him for years was now surging back, overwhelming him. "Do you have water?" Sophie asked. "I can patch your coolant hose for now, but you'll need to refill it so your engine doesn't die on the way back." Still dazed, Ethan nodded and went to the trunk to retrieve a container of bottled water. When he returned, Sophie had already wrapped the leak with a strip of specialized tape, muttering to herself, "Uncle Nate taught me how to do this. It won't last forever, but it'll get you back to a garage." "Who's Nate?" "My uncle. Claire's husband," she replied, pausing slightly. "It's just the two of us now." Sophie looked up, sweat beading on her temple, but her eyes were bright with pride. "All done. Wait about 10 minutes, then you can try starting the car. But don't go too fast. The hose is still weak." Ethan stared at her in silence. She handled everything like an adult, not slow, not showy, just calm, capable, and focused, as if fixing a car were something she did between homework and school recess. He took a breath, then softly said, "Thank you, Sophie. I'm Ethan." She smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Ethan," then held out her hand in an oddly formal gesture. As their hands touched, Ethan saw it clearly. The ruby ring had a tiny scratch on the underside, almost invisible to the average eye. But he recognized it, because he was the one who had caused that scratch, tripping as he handed the ring to Lily. "Did your mom ever say anything else about the ring?" he asked. Sophie looked down at it, then instinctively curled her fingers around it. "She said it was a symbol of a promise that must never be broken, but she never told me who gave it to her. Just that one day, I'd understand." Ethan swallowed hard. Her words felt like a dull blade slicing through an old wound. 15 years ago, as a teenage boy escaping a suffocating gala, Ethan had run off to the one place he felt real, the orphanage. There, he met Lily, the clever-eyed girl with a dazzling smile. He had given her the ruby ring, a gift from his birth mother, a promise that he would return. But then the orphanage shut down. Lily disappeared, every record erased, and his adoptive father, Preston Blake, strictly forbade any further inquiry. Ethan had tried to bury the past, but now the ring had returned in the finger of a girl whose eyes mirrored Lily's, Dee's too, and with it, the promise he had never fulfilled. "Do you live nearby?" Ethan asked gently. "Just down Maplewood Street. Want me to show you the way? If your car starts, I can guide you." "Sure. Thank you." Ethan walked back and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered for a moment, then reluctantly roared to life. It was running. He looked over at Sophie, beamed, hands still smeared with oil and grease. "Ever thought about becoming an engineer?" he joked. Sophie shrugged. "I just want to help people, like Mom helped me." A simple sentence, but to Ethan, it struck like a warning bell. He had no doubt now. Sophie was Lily. And if that was true, someone had stolen this girl from the life she was meant to live. Ethan Blake knew then and there his life would never be the same, because he had just rediscovered a memory that had never truly gone quiet. And if Sophie Carter really was Lily, then who had hidden her all these years? Who had orchestrated her disappearance? And more importantly, why was she resurfacing now? The narrow road leading into the Maplewood neighborhood looked as aged as its history. On either side were rows of bare trees and low red brick houses, many with fading paint. Some had crooked "For Rent" signs hanging by their gates. Ethan drove slowly, carefully following behind the small bike. Sophie pedaled ahead, her backpack swaying with each motion. Every so often, the girl would glance back, flash a bright smile, and point out the way, as if she had no idea that just minutes earlier, she had pulled a man from the edge of memory and reopened a door that had been buried for 15 years. Ethan tried to stay calm, but inside his mind was a scrambled archive. Images of the old orphanage, a boyish promise, a girl in a tattered dress smiling wide, the ruby ring, and now, Sophie. Everything swirled and overlapped, making his heart pound erratically. Sophie's home sat at the end of the block, part of a weathered row of old houses. The roof was worn, and the wooden door showed signs of peeling paint. But from inside through, a small window-warm light spilled out, accompanied by the faint scent of home-cooked food. It wasn't fancy, but it looked like a place someone might call home. Sophie parked and locked her bike, then turned to Ethan. "Want to come in? My Uncle Nate is probably making dinner. He doesn't talk much, but he's really kind." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face anyone connected to this past. But then, as if guided by something greater than himself, he nodded. "Sure, if it's okay." They stepped inside. As the door closed behind them, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s emerged from the kitchen. He wore rolled-up sleeves, an apron tied at his waist, and held a wooden spoon, stirring something on the stove. His eyes locked onto Ethan Swift, precise and assessing. "Uncle Nate," Sophie called out cheerfully. "This is Mr. Ethan. His car broke down on the road. I helped fix it, and he came home with me." The man stared at Ethan for a few seconds longer, then gave a curt nod. "You've got a good heart. Thanks for bringing her back." "Actually, I'm the one who was helped," Ethan said with a sheepish smile. "If it weren't for Sophie, I'd still be cursing at my Mustang on the roadside." Nate didn't reply right away. His gaze dropped to the ruby ring gleaming on Sophie's hand. His expression darkened. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked. "It was Mom Claire's, remember?" Sophie answered, puzzled. "Why are you asking like that?" Nate paused, then turned to Ethan. "Who are you?" His voice wasn't hostile, but it carried a firm weight like an invisible wall. Ethan understood. This wasn't just suspicion. This was the instinct of someone who had lost too much and refused to let anything get too close to what he loved. "My name is Ethan Blake," he said clearly, deliberately. "Son of Preston Blake." Silence swallowed the small room. Nate's grip on the spoon tightened. "I know that name. And you probably know he's not someone easy to trust," Ethan said. "And maybe now you understand why I couldn't explain this over the phone." Sophie stood between the two men, confused. "What's going on? Uncle Nate, do you and Mr. Ethan know my Mom Claire?" Neither answered right away. Finally, Nate exhaled heavily and set the spoon down by the stove. "Sit. But if you're here to dig up the past and stir trouble, I won't let it get within a foot of Sophie." Ethan sat, his fingers tightly intertwined. He began to recount everything. The orphanage Starlight Haven, the ring, Lily, the promise he never got to fulfill, the sudden shutdown of the orphanage, the erased records, his adoptive father's strict ban on any investigation. "Sophie might be Lily," Ethan finished, eyes unwavering. "I'm not 100% sure. But this ring, it's no coincidence. I gave it to her myself." Nate closed his eyes. A storm raged silently inside him. He remembered that night Claire bursting through the door, clutching a 2-year-old girl in her arms, hands trembling. She had said, "I couldn't let them take her." And from then on, they raised Sophie on the run, under a new name, living in hiding. He had never asked for details. "Claire passed away last year," Nate said hoarsely. "She left behind a journal. I never read it, just knew there were some documents, locked in the safe." Ethan sat quietly. At last, A faint glimmer of truth pierced through the murky fog. "Please let me see it," he whispered. "If I'm wrong, I'll walk away forever. But if I'm right, then my sister was stolen from my life for 15 years. Sophie said nothing. She didn't understand it all, but something inside her cracked. The name Lily had never been hers, and yet hearing it made her heart feel strangely heavy, like remembering something distant, something lost long ago. She looked at the two minto-separate world sand, felt something she had never considered in her 9 years of life. Maybe she didn't really belong here. And maybe the man standing in front of her wasn't a stranger at all. The air in the tiny apartment's living room had thickened like the fog before a storm. Nate moved slowly into the bedroom and returned with a square wooden box, worn and faded by time. He placed it on the table, quietly selecting a small key from a ring, his hand trembling slightly as he inserted it into the lock. Claire always said if anyone ever asked about Sophie's past, don't answer. Just say her mother died in an accident. Say we knew nothing more. But Nate looked at Ethan. Now I know some truths can't stay buried forever. The soft click of the lock echoed faintly, but to Ethan, it sounded like a thunderclap. Inside the box was a thick, leather-bound notebook, its cover peeling with age. Faintly embossed on the front were the words, "For the day she asks." Nate opened to the first page, turning each one as if diffusing a memory bomb. The handwriting was neat and firm, the script of someone who had once been a nurse, meticulous with every number, every detail. Ethan and Sophie sat down together, focused as Nate began to read aloud. The 12th of July, late night meeting at Starlight Haven. I was on night duty, but summoned to the 3rd floor, the restricted zone. Inside were Mr. Blake and Director Holloway. The door was ajar, and I heard him say, "The girl is a perfect replica. We need to monitor intelligence, reflexes, and developmental divergence in low-income environments." I didn't understand everything, but I heard the name Lily. It was Hearth, little girl with the big eyes who smiled at me every morning. She wasn't an experiment. I decided I would take her. Ethan clenched his fists, sweat pooling in his palms. Sophie sat frozen, each word peeling away the fog she once thought was just coincidence. Nate flipped further. In the middle of the diary, Claire's entries became more detailed. I waited until 3 a.m. during the shift change, wrapped Lily in a blanket, packed a few clothes and papers. The ring, I took it as a sign, so that one day, if anyone searched for her, they would recognize it. I'm not her biological mother, but I choose to be her mother, even if it means living in hiding for the rest of my life. Ethan couldn't hold back. He shot to his feet. I knew it. This was the night they claimed the orphanage was shut down due to budget cuts. But it was a cover-up, a purge. He began pacing the room like a cornered animal. My father, Preston, he turned Starlight Haven into a lab for Project Gemini. Sophie blinked. Project what? Ethan sat back down, locking eyes with her. A Black Ops program, based on the theory that if two children shared identical DNA but grew up in different environments, would they evolve? They separated twin-zone raised in privilege, the other in poverty, to observe differences in intellect, psychology, adaptability. Nate cut in, voice gravelly. Are you saying Sophie was one of them? Not one of them, Ethan said. The one, the centerpiece, Lilia Sophius, the first confirmed success of Project Gemini. Silence gripped the room. Sophie turned to Nate. So, you knew Mom wasn't my real mom? Nate placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Claire never hid it to deceive you. She wanted to protect you. She chose you every single day, no matter what. Sophie lowered her head. For the first time, she felt her heart breaking, not from anger, but from disorientation. She had thought she knew who she was. Now, it felt like her entire identity was just a faded coat of paint over a buried truth. Ethan pulled out a worn Polaroid photo from his wallet, the only one he'd kept for 15 years. A young, dark-haired boy held hands with a smaller girl, standing in a white stone playground. On her finger, the ruby ring sparkled in the sunlight. This was Lily. This is you, Ethan said. Sophie stared at it, her chest tightening. Though she couldn't remember clearly, that facish couldn't look away from it. So, if I'm Lily, she hesitated. Then who was my real mother? Ethan turned to Nate. There's one more thing we need to open. With a heavy sigh, Nate reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out a large yellow envelope. On the front, written in faded ink, "Only open when she starts asking." Inside was an old birth certificate, the handwriting blurred with age, but one line still clear. Lily Elizabeth Blake. Born the 17th of April. Father, Preston Blake. Mother, Vivian Blake. Sophie whispered. "Blake, like your last name." Ethan closed his eyes. "Because you're my sister, Sophie. You're my blood, my little sister." The room seemed to freeze. And for the first time since this story began, one thing became unmistakably clear. The ring was never just a clue. It was a compass pointing toward the buried truths that could no longer remain hidden. And now, those truths had begun to rise slowly, but irreversibly. Night fell slowly over the Maplewood neighborhood, carrying the damp chill of early spring. Inside the small apartment, the living room light remained on, but none of the three people sitting there paid attention to the time. Sophie hugged a small pillow tightly to her chest. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't panic like a typical 9-year-old would upon learning that her entire life was a carefully constructed fiction. She simply sat in silence, the kind of silence that worried Ethan more than any emotional outburst. "You okay?" Ethan asked gently. Sophie gave a slight nod, her gaze still fixed on the birth certificate lying on the table. "I don't know what to feel. They said I was adopted, and now I'm not. Mom Claire was the person I loved most, but she wasn't really my mom. And yet, if it hadn't been for her, I might not even be alive." Nate gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then looked hard at Ethan. "So what now? You planning to take her back to some millionaire mansion?" Ethan shook his head, his voice slow but resolute. "I didn't come to reclaim anyone. I came to reclaim the truth. The truth. My father, Preston Blake, buried under mountains of wealth, reputation, and fear." He pulled a small black USB drive from his coat and tossed it onto the table. "This is a copy of what I managed to extract from the temporary data archive at the company. It's labeled as real estate data misfiled in 2010, but in reality, it contains files linked to one name, Project Gemini." Nate grabbed an old laptop from the shelf and plugged in the USB. The screen lit up with a list of folders, encrypted with military-style codes. Sophie stared at the strings of letters and numbers. She didn't understand them, but she could sense their gravity from the way the two adults held their breath. "Can you decrypt it?" Nate asked. "I had a program built for that," Ethan replied. "But what I really need now are the hard copies documents, signatures, original photos, and those are stored in only one place, the headquarters of Blake Group." Nate scoffed. "You mean break into Preston's fortress? Good luck with that. No need to break in," Ethan said with a smirk. "I still have clearance to access the third-floor executive records storage. I was once groomed to take over. My father thinks I gave up a long time ago." Sophie spoke up, her voice eerily calm. "If Mr. Preston did all this, why keep me alive? Why not kill me or hide me forever?" The question silenced them both. It was Ethan who finally responded. "Because you weren't a mistake. You were part of the plan." He opened one of the files and scrolled down to a line highlighted in bold red. Subject, L. Blake. Status, Preserve for Succession Alternative. Evaluated at N for integration. "What does that mean?" Sophie asked. "You were kept as a backup," Ethan said quietly. "If I ever betrayed him or didn't meet expectations, you'd be the replacement engineered to be perfectly loyal. A genetic replica. No memories, no resistance." Nate slammed his hand on the table. "Bastard." Ethan continued. "But the plan fell apart when Claire took you. The project was thought to have failed. And yet, Sophie still grew up strong, brilliant, capable of exceeding every prediction my father ever made." "And now he knows she's alive?" Nate pressed. Ethan nodded. "I'm not sure if I've tipped him off yet, but it's possible. Preston has always known." Sophie stared at the words. "Evaluated 18. She didn't fully understand, but instinct told her 18 wasn't just any age. She looked up. "I'm not a replacement." "No," Ethan said, gripping her small hand. "You're the one person he can't control." Outside the window, a street lamp cast light onto the empty road, but from a distance, an unusual flicker appeared headlights. Ethan sprang to the curtain and peeked out. A black SUV sat parked 2 houses away, engine still running. a silhouette visible inside. "We're being watched," Ethan said quietly. "We need to move before it's too late." Nate nodded. "I have a brother in the Jersey suburbs. Former special ops. Someone we can trust." Ethan gathered the USB, the diary, the birth certificate, everything into a small, waterproof bag. Sophie put on her backpack, for the first time not asking why. She already knew. Her quiet life had just officially ended. She was no longer Sophie Carter. Not yet fully Lily Blake, either. But one thing was certain. She was no longer anyone's pawn. From this moment on, she would choose her own role in this game. Dawn broke slowly over Maplewood as the old gray pickup truck slipped out of the neighborhood, gliding through the empty intersection like a ghost. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, eyes locked on the rearview mirror. Sophie was in the back seat, resting her head on her backpack, clutching Claire's diary in her arms like a sacred relic. Behind them, the black SUV had disappeared around a bend. But no one in the truck dared to breathe a sigh of relief. Ethan knew better. Once Preston was involved, every movement would be tracked. He wasn't the kind of man to send just one surveillance car. He was the kind who'd plant cameras in pillows if necessary. "You're sure that thing's not tagged?" Nate asked without taking his eyes off the road. "The USB I used has a signal jammer. It blocks GPS within a 2-meter radius, but it'll only hold for a few hours. After that, we're on our own," Ethan replied. They reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Jersey just before 6 a.m. Inside, a powerfully built, dark-skinned man with graying hair stood waiting, wearing a worn hoodie and holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Jack Monroe," Nate introduced. "Former Special Forces team leader. My old comrade from Kandahar." Jack nodded at Ethan, then bent down to shake Sophie's hand. "Hey there, princess. Heard you've stirred up a whole empire, huh?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I just fixed a car. They're the ones who lost their minds." Jack let out a loud laugh. "Smart one." They didn't linger long. After a brief rest, Jack led them to the base meta bunker equipped with security systems, access monitors, and 2-foot-thick concrete walls. "No one finds this place without instructions," Jack said. "I once hid a dissident journalist here for 3 months." He smiled like it was a joke, but his eyes weren't joking. Ethan powered up his laptop and reopened the files. "I need to locate the original code structure of Project Gemini. The one Preston buried even from internal records." "You sure someone inside the company won't sell you out?" Jack asked, initiating a virtual network. "I'm not sure anyone's still on my side, but I know Preston kept the original documents in the archive room on the 7th floor, the one only he and I ever had clearance for." "So you're going back to open your father's safe behind his back?" Nate muttered. "Sounds like something out of a thriller." Ethan said nothing. Part of him still couldn't believe this was real, that just days ago, he was a polished executive preparing to marry the daughter of another elite family. And now, he was living underground, planning to infiltrate his own company like a tech criminal. "There are hallway cameras, retinal scanners, security on rotation 24/7, Ethan explained. "I'll use the maintenance route. My badge still works, but I'll need a backup plan if things go wrong." Nate nodded. "I'm going with you. I'm not letting you face that monster alone." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You stay here with Sophie. No matter what happens, she comes first." Sophie stood up. "I don't need to be hidden away like some fairy tale child. I need to know what's happening to me." Both Jack and Nate went silent. Ethan looked at her, 9 years old, yet with eyes that seemed 19, and he understood. If Preston designed Project Gemini to create independent thinking humans, then he had succeeded, just not in the way he'd hoped. Finally, Ethan exhaled. "All right, but you stay here. I'll get the files and come right back." Sophie smirked. "As long as you don't die like the spies in movies." Jack laughed, breaking the tension a little. But they all knew the return to Blake Group wouldn't be easy. 2 hours later, Ethan stood in the basement elevator of the Manhattan skyscraper known as Blake Tower. Dark suit, blue tie, company ID pinned to his chest. No one questioned him. He was Ethan Blake, beloved son of Preston Blake, the unspoken heir to the empire. Only he knew. Today, he wasn't here to inherit power. He was here to dismantle it. The elevator chimed as it stopped on the 7th floor. The doors opened to a long, silent corridor. Ethan moved swiftly toward the secure records room where a cold metal door had remained locked for years. He leaned into the retinal scanner, A green light swept across his eye for 2 seconds. Access granted. The door clicked open. Ethan stepped inside, inhaled deeply, and fixed his eyes on the massive safe at the end of the room. Inside Eve, everything went as he suspected. Wasn't just documentation on Project Gemini, but also the proof behind the real reason why Lily Sophie was taken from her birth mother the moment she was born. The thick steel door at the end of the archive room slammed shut behind Ethan with a cold, metallic thud. Inside was a silence so complete it felt a liver room with no cameras, no microphones, no watching eyes. The only place in the entire Blake Corporation where Preston allowed anything that should never be digitized to remain. The room felt like a crypt of secrets. Filing cabinets lined the walls, neatly labeled with internal codes. At the center stood a massive black steel, safe, matte, and unyielding, its front fixed with a triple-dial mechanical combination lock. Ethan approached slowly, palms slick with sweat. He knew his father wouldn't choose anything obvious. Preston loved power, but loathed predictability. Not the birthday, Ethan muttered. Not the wedding date. He tried a date his mother once mentioned, the day Preston signed the founding contract for Blake Group, the 8th of January 1991. Click, click, clack. The lock released. Ethan froze. His throat tightened. Slowly, he pulled the heavy door open as if lifting the lid of his own coffin. Inside were 3 drawers. He opened the first. Medical records, birth certificates, DNA scans. One name caught his eye immediately. Lily Elizabeth Blake. No doubt. It was Sophie. It was Lily. It was his sister. Beneath that was a thick file marked Project Gemini, Confidential, Level Omega. He skimmed the first few lines. Subject: Monozygotic twin separation for comparative analysis of environmental influence on genetic expression. Pair 0001. Lily Elizabeth. Environment A. Artificial care at Starlight Haven. Environment B. Elite education. High surveillance. Identity concealed. Ethan held his breath. A final note at the bottom made his heart hammer. Elizabeth, special processing. Transferred to Huntington Estate. New identity. Charlotte Hayes. His vision blurred. Everything he had left of innocence shattered right there. Charlotte, his fiancée. Lily's twin, Elizabeth. Ethan stumbled back, bracing himself against the edge of the safe. His breath caught in his chest. Charlotte, whom he thought was just a strategic pawn in a corporate marriage, had been part of Preston's twisted game from the beginning. And worse, she might have known. He pulled out his phone, quickly snapping photos of the entire file, then shut the safe. He couldn't linger. Even without cameras, any change in the room's temperature could trigger silent alarms. Ethan exited the 7th floor, taking the service stairs to the basement, the old fire escape route he once used to sneak out for cigarettes as an intern. As he made his way out, his phone buzzed. Charlotte's name lit up the screen. He hesitated. He couldn't not answer. Hello? I know you went in. Her voice was cold. No time for pleasantries. I saw you enter the 7th floor from the surveillance room. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. So, you knew? A pause. I've known for a long time, she said quietly. I knew I was adopted. I knew there was another girl who was replaced. I knew about the ring, but it wasn't until a year ago that I discovered my real name, Elizabeth. And you still agreed to marry me? Still went along with Preston's plans? Ethan couldn't hold back the anger. You think I had a choice? She snapped. My entire life, I was raised as the backup plan. I had to be perfect. Every action, every word, every breath. But I was never a person, never real. So who are you now? Ethan asked, voice ragged. She didn't respond right away. Then, calmly but with steel in her tone, she said, I'm the one who's going to bring your father down before he plays us as his final move. Silence blanketed them. Ethan sighed, exhausted. Where are you? A safe place, Charlotte replied. And the next time we meet, it won't be as fiancé and fiancée. It'll be as allies. The call ended. Ethan stood frozen on the stairwell, feeling like the world had lost all meaning now. More lines between right and wrong, friend and enemy. But he knew one thing. Charlotte Elizabeth was at a crossroads. And if she truly chose to fight, they might just be able to bring down the empire Preston had built on the bones of the innocent. Ethan stepped out onto the streets. blending into the chaos of Manhattan like he'd never disappeared. In his pocket were documents that could set Blake Group on fire. And somewhere across the city, two girls, Sophie and Elizabeth, linked by blood but raised worlds apart, were beginning to realize they weren't broken experiments. They were the storm Preston had created. And now, it was coming for him from both ends of the horizon. In the dim, flickering basement of Jack Monroe's bunker, the pale fluorescent lights did little to hide the tension that had been growing with every passing minute. Sophie sat at the table, still clutching Claire's diary as if it were the final thread connecting her to the life she once believed was real. Nate stood near the door, his hand never far from the pistol holstered at his waist. He had never been a paranoid man, but ever since Ethan left, a quiet dread gnawed at him like a starving animal an instinct that they were no longer alone. Sophie broke the silence. "Uncle Nate, if Mom Claire risked everything to take me away, why didn't she leave more behind? No instructions? No letters to Ethan? Didn't she try to find anyone?" Nate turned, his gaze softening. He walked over and sat beside her, his voice low and steady. "Because Claire had been threatened. Not just once." Sophie blinked. "By who?" "By a man named Harold Grant Preston's private attorney. He was also the former chief of internal operations at Blake Group before Ethan took over." Sophie fell silent. "I've never heard of him." "No one has," Nate said. "He works from the shadows. He deletes files, silences, witnesses, scrubs clean anything that should have been exposed. It was Harold who showed up at the hospital the night Claire took you. He didn't act directly, but he made it very clear if she spoke, no one would survive." Sophie gripped the diary tighter. "So, is he still alive?" Nate nodded. "He is. And according to Jack Monroe, who just checked in over comm, someone matching his description was recently spotted in an old neighborhood where Claire once worked as a nurse back in 2009. Sophie furrowed her brow. "Why would he go there now?" "Because he knows Claire hid something," Nate said. "Not in the diary. Somewhere no one would ever expect an old clinic where she worked under an alias after she fled." Just then, a soft alarm went off. Not a loud syringist, a faint click from a wall panel Jack's silent warning system. Nate shot to his feet. Sophie instinctively grabbed her backpack. Both moved toward a hidden panel that led to the emergency tunnel. Jack burst in. A black Lincoln Navigator just parked outside the warehouse. Commercial plates. One guy in a black suit stepped out, followed by two others dressed like couriers. "Harold?" Nate asked. "Definitely his men," Jack confirmed. "I ran facial recon of them used to work security at Blake Manor. He popped up in the background of a missing journalist case last year." Nate turned to Sophie. "We need to go. Now." "No," Sophie said firmly. "I'm not running again without knowing why they're hunting me like this. I want to go to my mom's old clinic." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What is it now?" Nate replied. "An abandoned vet clinic. Claire worked there under an assumed identity no one could trace. She once said, 'Some things can't be hidden at home, but they can be hidden in places no one thinks to look.'" Sophie stood, steady. "Then we get there before they do." Iting. 20 minutes later, the old pickup truck coasted to a stop in front of a faded cement building in a deserted Newark commercial strip. The glass was shattered, and the faded sign read, "Brookside Pet Clinic, closed since 2015. Jack held a flashlight, Nate had his pistol drawn, and Sophie followed close behind. The air inside was musty, tinged with the stale scent of antiseptic and mildew. "I remember something from the diary." Sophie flipped through the pages, stopping at one marked in red pencil. "If one day you no longer know where to go, find the place where I once healed even the smallest. Lives the old emergency room, beneath operating table number 3. They rushed to the final room in the hall, a tattered curtain still dangling from rusted hooks. Beneath table number 3, under the tiled floor, was a false metal panel. Jack pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was a locked steel box, no bigger than a biscuit tin. Nate cracked it open. Inside were a USB stick, a thick envelope, and a weathered magnetic tape reel. Before they could examine anything further, a loud crash echoed from the front, the sound of a metal door being broken down with force. "We're being tracked," Jack muttered. "Get ready." There was no time. Nate stuffed everything into Sophie's backpack and pushed her toward the back exit. "Run. Don't look back. Meet Ethan at the fallback point." "What about you?" Sophie asked, panicked. "Jack and I will stall them. Go no Lily." "Lily." It was the first time she'd heard her real name not in a file, not in a secret whisper, but spoken with belief. Sophie Lilly bolted through the back door. Behind her, gunfire erupted like thunder. The morning fog still clung to the narrow alley behind Brookside Clinic, shrouding it in shades of gray. Sophie, or more truthfully now, Lilleran, with trembling legs. But she didn't stop. Her tangled hair whipped behind her, and the small backpack pounded against her back with each desperate stride. Gunfire echoed in bursts behind her, thudding in her chest like war drums. She didn't know if Nate and Jack were alive or had been captured, but she remembered the instructions run. Guard the evidence. Meet Ethan at the rendezvous point. She sprinted past 3 blocks, arriving at an abandoned parking lot where a silver sedan sat waiting, doors already unlocked by remote. Ethan had planned ahead. Lily dove in, locked the doors, and collapsed in the passenger seat, gasping for breath. She yanked off her backpack and pulled out the envelope Claire had left, and the worn magnetic tape obsolete since the last decade. She didn't cry. No tears came. Only one emotion rose within her now. Rage. Rage that had been simmering all along. Rage that she was hidden, that her mother had to flee, that the world had cast her as a pawn from the moment she was born. She unfolded the first paper in the envelope. It was a letter handwritten, shaking, but unmistakably Claire's voice. The woman who had loved her with all the time she had left. To Lily, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a full childhood, but I never once regretted taking you. You are not a product of any project. You are a person. A child whose eyes convinced me that truth is worth protecting. I overheard Preston talk about the purpose of age 18, that when you were old enough they would activate the replacement self. I didn't understand all of it, but I knew one thing. You're not something to be activated. You're someone who must choose your own path. The tape in this box contains a confession from someone who once worked inside the system. If you can find a way to play it, you'll know who you're fighting for and who you're fighting against. Lily folded the letter slowly, hands trembling not from fear, but from pain now crystallizing into strength. In the glove compartment, she found a portable tape player, an old model designed for internal security use. Ethan had left it for her. She plugged it in, inserted the tape. A whirring sound. Then a tired, deep male voice filled the car. My name is Dr. Gordon Levinson, former biomedical supervisor at the Blake Research Institute. I'm recording this after discovering that Project Gemini's data was falsified to serve political agendas. At first, I believed we were doing something revolutionary, separating twins to study how environments shape human nature. But I soon realized we weren't researching, we were engineering. The child in environment blazed with the Huntington family, renamed Charlotte, was subjected to a behavioral conditioning protocol designed to create absolute loyalty to Preston Blake. The other child, Lily, was supposed to be erased, but a nurse named Claire took her and broke the surveillance cycle. Preston didn't kill Lily because he saw her as a contingency plan, a resettable heir, a clean slate in case Ethan rebelled. But what Preston never accounted for was a mother's love. If anyone finds this recording, know this. This isn't just about one child. This is a system of power structure built upon stolen bodies and erased memories. Lily jolted up from the seat, yanked out the tape, wrapped it tight, and pressed it to her chest. Her head was spinning. She didn't need to understand every technical detail or hierarchy. She knew one thing. She was a person, not a prototype, not a clone, not a fallback. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. I'm coming. Charlotte is with me. Don't be afraid. She's a victim too. Lily froze. She had never seen Charlotte's face, but through every piece of this puzzle, she had begun to understand. Her twinth one, raised in luxury, locked in an invisible cage, was coming. Two paths unsevered were now converging. Not to clash, but to liberate. A car horn blared faintly in the distance. Lily took a deep breath. For the first time, she felt like she was standing on the soil of truth. She was no longer the girl called Sophie, riding her bike home and fixing cars like a game. She was no longer Lily, the secret hidden away like a flaw to be erased. She was the fuse, and Preston Blake was about to learn. The most dangerous enemy is not the one outside the gates. It's the child whose will he tried to extinguish from the moment she took her first breath. The silver SUV rolled to a silent stop beneath a canopy of trees, hidden behind an abandoned riverside building along the Hudson. No cameras, no guards, no GPS signal. Only the biting chill of the wind drifting through the rotted wooden door frames. Lily stood beside the vehicle, her palms slick with sweat. In her pocket were the magnetic tape and a copy of Claire's handwritten letter. But what made her heart pound wasn't the secrets she carried. It was who she was about to meet. Someone who, for the past 9 years, she hadn't known existed. Someone she'd never remembered, never imagined she might one day see. Charlotte Hayes. Elizabeth Blake. The car door opened. Ethan stepped out first, his eyes scanning the surroundings before they settled on Lily. He smiled gently the way a brother should smile at a sister. No pressure, no expectation. Just the warmth of someone who had finally found the missing piece of his own past. And then Charlotte emerged. Lily froze. It was herself. The girl standing across from her was around 18, with longer, tidier hair. Her face was sharp, her eyes deep, and her posture radiated the cold confidence of someone raised under constant surveillance. Charlotte too halted as she looked at Lily. They didn't need a mirror. Didn't need DNA. Didn't need anyone to explain. They knew. You, Charlotte spoke first, her voice barely a breeze across dry grass. You look just like Mom. Lily swallowed, taking a single step forward. I don't remember her, but I remember Claire. Silence lingered. Then Charlotte nodded slowly, offering a faint, bittersweet smile. Then between us, we carry the whole of the woman who gave us life. They stood staring at one another as if looking through an old mirror, seeing the life she might have had, the other confronting a life that had been stolen. Ethan spoke gently. We don't have much time. Harold Grant is trailing Nate. Jack's been out of contact for 30 minutes. Preston knows the tide is turning. He won't wait. Lily handed Ethan the tape. I listened to it. Dr. Levinson's voice. Claire hid it beneath the clinic floor. Charlotte opened her bag and pulled out a thick file. And here's the printed record of the hidden transfers in Blake Group's shadow accounts. $200,000 channeled to a bio-research facility tasked with cultivating a backup twin sample since 2006. Ethan's brow furrowed. Backup sample? What do you mean? Charlotte looked at Lily. We weren't the only ones in the game. Preston attempted to create a third version of failed genetic replication. It didn't survive past age 2. Lily's eyes widened. You mean they tried to clone us? Charlotte nodded. I used to think you were the clone. Used to hate the idea. But now, looking at you, I know. You're the real one. You were allowed to live. I was shaped to obey. No one spoke for a moment. The sun broke through the trees, casting light across two faces that were uncannily alike, hardened by control, the other sharpened by survival. At last, Ethan said, You're both real. You're both human. And now, we have a choice. Accept that we were made by Preston, or end the game he started. Lily clenched her fist. I don't want to run anymore. Charlotte looked at her. Then we fight. Ethan nodded. Starting with the tape. But we have to be smart, not the media. They're too easy to silence. We need to expose him on his own stage. Charlotte smiled faintly. You mean the Blake Global Education Initiative Gala next week, where he's invited every political and corporate elite in New York? Exactly, Ethan replied. He wants to announce the future, a generation of elite minds born from superior DNA. Fine. Let's show them what that generation really looks like, ones who don't follow orders. Lily turned to Charlotte. Are you ready? Charlotte tightened her grip on the file. I've been ready since the moment they made you their plan B. Ethan pulled up a map on his tablet. Tonight, we split. Lily and Charlotte, you'll meet with Margaret Lane. She used to work inside Gen Institute B04. She vanished from public life in 2011. She holds the final key. Charlotte nodded. And you? Ethan's smile was icy. I'm going to see Preston. Both sisters turned to him. Lily whispered, Alone? Ethan tightened his jaw. Not to negotiate. To make sure he and us were no longer lab rats in his experiment. A light rain misted over New York as Lily and Charlotte stepped onto the worn stone steps of a small, aging house in the suburbs of Albany. The house was single-story, with exposed brick walls, a rusted iron gate, and no doorbell, only a faded plaque under a dim porch light. Margaret Lane, retired clinical researcher. Charlotte knocked 3 times. No answer. Lily glanced at her. She may not want to be found. Charlotte nodded slightly. Or maybe she's afraid. The door creaked open, just a crack. A cloudy, aged eye peered out from behind a security chain. Who are you? Charlotte took a breath. I'm Charlotte Hayes. This is Lily Carterberth name. Lily Elizabeth Blake. At the sound of the name Lily, the woman's eye widened. The door slammed shut for a brief second, then opened fully. Get in. Quickly. Inside was an entirely different world, cramped but meticulously clean, lined with shelves of medical texts, research files, and carefully arranged old documents. On the table, a teapot steamed faintly. Margaret Lane, somewhere in her 70s, with short white hair and the sharp eyes of someone who once stood guard at the gates of the system, pointed for Lily to sit. You carry Olivia's blood. Lily blinked. You knew my mother? I did, Margaret replied, pouring tea. But only through her file. I once thought your mother was a pawn, but she was the only one with the courage to ask the right question at the right time. Charlotte stepped forward and placed a file on the table. We're not here to blame you. We're here to ask you to speak the truth. Margaret sat down, studying both of them as if staring straight into a past she never wanted to revisit. I was the one who signed off on the first phase of Project Gemini. When Preston proposed the idea of elevating the human genome by separating twins and raising them under different conditions, many objected, but he convinced the board with this line: if Darwin were alive, he'd embrace controlled evolution. Lily clenched her hands. Does anyone else know about this? No one dared keep proof except me. Margaret quietly opened a drawer and pulled out a black film reel. This is the original footage of the 2004 boardroom session where Preston pitched the concept of genetically guided power inheritance. His signature is on it. He thought I was too naive to keep a copy. Charlotte took the reel and tucked it into a waterproof case. This could destroy him. What's the price? Lily asked softly. Will anyone actually be held accountable? Or will it all just vanish again? Margaret looked at Harold's eyes, but crystal clear. The price is you will have to live with the truth of who you are and accept that your past won't look like anyone else's. No one gets punished unless the survivors are willing to stand. The room fell into silence. Lily clenched the ruby ring in her hand, then gently slipped it off, placing it on the table. Then I choose to live as someone who writes the future, not someone paralyzed by the past. Margaret nodded. And that's why I'm helping you. The old woman handed Charlotte a small slip of paper with an address on it, a property in Long Island. This is where Preston hid his auxiliary lab, where they may still be storing blood samples, genetic logs, proof of cloning. If you truly want to expose everything, you'll need to get there before he clears it out. Charlotte grabbed the paper. Will you testify? Margaret smiled and took a slow sip of tea. I've lived with this secret for 20 years. It's time to let it die with Preston. I may. On the ride back, in Ethan's car, the three sat in silence, each lost in thought. Ethan reviewed the tape Charlotte had handed him, his lips pressed into a tight line. This video, if released at the right moment, Blake Group's stock would collapse overnight. Lily spoke up, her voice steady. Not just the stock, his reputation, his control, his illusion of untouchability. Charlotte checked her watch. 3 days until the gala. Preston will be there surrounded by the elite. It's the moment he believes he's won. Ethan smirked, which makes it the perfect time for his 2 test subjects to step onto that stage and burn it to the ground. That night, in a soundproof legal office in Brooklyn, Margaret Lane recorded a full testimony. On camera, she listed every name tied to Project Gemini, outlined financial routes, presented genetic analysis, and identified all connected facilities. Her final words, delivered calmly into the lens. Whether I live or die after tonight, I leave this not for forgiveness, but so that justice might, for the first time, step through the gates of the elite. She looked straight into the lens, her voice cold as steel. Preston Blake was wrong. Human beings are not made to be designed. They are made to choose. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Crown Hotel shimmered with opulence. A sea of tuxedos and high-end gowns drifted across the floor like waves of silver silk CEOs, politicians, billionaires, global investors. All had gathered for the gala that had dominated headlines for weeks. The Blake Global Initiative, launching the future of engineered excellence. At the center of the ballroom stood a stage designed to resemble a futuristic lab module where the head of the empire, Preston Blake, would unveil his next 25-year plan. The humanization of talent, intelligence guided by blood, and what he proudly called the directed genetic legacy. Preston arrived precisely on time always. Black tuxedo, Bordeaux red silk pocket square, and the poised walk of a man once called by Fortune magazine the power architect of the century. Beside him was Harold Granthis, longtime private attorney, who had vanished for nearly a decade but now returned like a shadow permanently tethered to its master. Harold leaned in. They're still silent. No word from Ethan or the two girls. Preston smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator catching scent of ripe prey. They're not silent. They're waiting. And I'll be the one who chooses when the clock strikes. Backstage, Ethan adjusted his earpiece. Jack's voice crackled through the internal comms. Emergency exits locked. Backup projector is live. Margaret Lane's en route. Security hasn't noticed a thing. Ethan gave a silent nod. In another wing, Charlotte and Lily were changing outfits in the tech room. Both wore simple white shirts and black pantses, if being twins came with a natural uniform. You sure about this? Lily asked, her eyes fixed on the monitor showing the main stage. No, Charlotte replied, exhaling slowly. But you know, some truths, if we don't speak them, will swallow us forever. Lily nodded. And if we stay silent today, tomorrow another child becomes a product. Charlotte gripped her sister's hand. Then let us be the last. 20 o'clock. Main stage. Preston stepped onto the podium to thunderous applause. His voice rang out charismatic, familiar, rehearsed like a sermon. We've come far from blueprints and laboratories to the people we believe are the future. And tonight I'm proud to unveil Blake Group's next evolution, a talent cultivation program based not just on skills, but on DNA. A murmur swept through the audience. Behind him, the massive LED screen displayed smooth animations of gene structures, interconnected with phrases like optimal performance, genetic mapping, and inherited cognition. Preston continued, his confidence that of a man who had stood atop power too long to fear a fall. We will no longer hire by resume, but by genome. Those who meet the thresholds reflex, cognition, psychological resilience will be invested in, trained, and shaped as the perfect successors. Just then, the screen flickered. A fake glitch. Preston hesitated slightly, but pressed on. Biotech will allow. The screen went dark. Then it lit up again. But this time, it wasn't Blake Group's branding. It was grainy, black and white footage from 2004. A younger Preston sat in a private boardroom, mid-pitch. We don't need to nurture geniuses. We manufacture them. Start with twins. One in control, one in nature. Compare, measure, adjust. We're not creating people. We're creating power. The ballroom went silent. Then a female voice rang from the wings. Charlotte stepped onto the stage. That's my father. Gasps rippled through the hall. Charlotte stood in the spotlight, removed her earpiece, and unpinned her name badge. My name is Elizabeth Blake, born the 17th of April, 2006, daughter of Preston Blake, and a product of Project Geminia, psychological, behavioral, and biological experiment on separated twins. Behind her, Lily emerged. The soft lighting bathed two identical faces. I was the one taken away, Lily said. Not to live, but to wait as a contingency. I survived because a woman without my blood loved me more than any gene profile ever could. Charlotte turned to her father, who now stood frozen on the stage. You wanted to use us to talk about the future, but the future doesn't need your blueprint. And another voice rose from the crowd. I'm Margaret Lane. I participated in the project, and I will testify. The ballroom erupted. People stood. Security surged toward the stage, but too late. On the screen, Dr. Levinson's recorded confession began to play. Preston Blake operated an experimental program on children, based on genetics, on behavior, without consent, without ethics. News cameras captured the entire scene. Politicians reached for their phones. Investors exchanged horrified glances. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Number Project Gemini, Blake Group collapse. Number Truth Not DNA. Preston could not utter a word. Harold whispered, "We need to leave. Now." But there was no way out. The FBI was already waiting at the door. As Preston was escorted out of the ballroom, his eyes met the gaze of the two girls standing beneath the lights. They did not flinch. They did not look away. And in that moment, Preston knew he had raised the very ones who would tear down the empire he had built. 3 days after that fateful gala, the name Preston Blake no longer topped any list of America's most powerful businessmen. Instead, it saturated headlines like, "Biotech mogul exposed for 20-year covert child experiment. Secret twins dismantle the Blake empire. A scandal bigger than Enron. From genetic genius to moral disgrace. Will Preston Blake face justice?" Blake Group stock plummeted within 36 hours, wiping out over $8 billion in market value. Investors fled. Contracts were canceled. Those who once shook Preston's hand that night now called their lawyers and scrambled to scrub their names from every press photo. The FBI formally charged Preston Blake with organized genetic crimes, exploitation of minors for experimental purposes, obstruction of justice and federal medical record tampering, conspiracy to manipulate genetic equity policy in markets. Harold Grant was also taken into custody. He agreed to cooperate with the investigation, a polite phrase for turning on Preston to cut his own sentence. Enster. At a small lakeside cabin in the Catskills, Charlotte, Lily, Ethan, and Margaret Lane sat around the kitchen table, while the soft hum of a news broadcast filled the room. And, according to independent sources, the blood samples at Blake Medical Extension have been sealed. The FBI has collected over 500 gigabytes of data, including genetic maps, psychological profiles, and records linked to at least 12 minors reported missing between 2003 and 2015. Lily said nothing. She sat clutching her backpack inside were the remnants of Claire's legacy, the diary, the tape, and the ruby ring she no longer wore. It now rested in a wooden box on the windowsill. Charlotte, seated opposite, slowly flipped through a dusty copy of the Prohibition on Unregulated Genetic Intervention Act, a shelved draft from 2009, now revived in Congress because of the Gemini scandal. "We did it," Ethan said quietly. His voice was raw with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with clarity. Charlotte nodded gently. "Yes, but the price was everything we thought we knew." Lily turned to Margaret. "So, after all this, who am I now? Whose child? A name in a file labeled experimental product? Or just someone lost between two lives?" Margaret looked at her with the calm wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to know that the most important answers aren't written in records. You are who you choose to be, not who someone engineered, not who someone trained, not who someone expected. You are Lily. You are Charlotte. You are a survivor. And now, a creator. A week later, Charlotte and Lily appeared in a closed Senate hearing. No press, no cameras, only senior lawmakers and a panel of bioethics experts. Charlotte recounted her path from a child shaped to be perfect to a young woman who dismantled the illusion. Lily told a different story of an oily childhood spent under car lifts, of Claire, and of the ruby ring that once symbolized memory, now left respectfully in the past. One senator asked, "If we offered you both roles as special advisors to the committee drafting the new Genetic Ethics Act, would you accept?" Charlotte smiled. "I was a product of a system without rules. If I get the chance to help build one, then it's not a choice, it's a responsibility." Lily added simply, "I just don't want anyone else to disappear like I did." That night, at the cabin, Ethan found the sisters on the porch, gazing out at the moonlit lake. "I'm flying to Brussels tomorrow," Charlotte said. "International Conference on Bioethics. You should stay. Live a normal life." Lily smiled softly. "I'm not normal, but I want to live like a normal person. Choose my own school. Make friends. Be able to say I hate math not because my genes say so, but because I just do." Charlotte chuckled. "So what do you choose for yourself?" Lily turned to her. "I choose to decide who my family is. People who aren't perfect, but love me without needing a reason." Ethan walked over and wrapped his arms around them. Family. That's the one thing Preston never understood, and that's why he could never win. And a week later, in front of the newly renamed Phoenix Institute for Genetic Ethics, formerly Blake Group, Lily stood before cameras for the first time, this time as a survivor and a witness. She didn't speak in anger. She didn't cry. She spoke with truth. I am not a product. I am not a backup plan. I am Lily Blake, and no genome can dictate my will. And at sunset that same evening, Charlotte sent Lily a selfie from Belgium. Behind her fluttered the EU flag. On her hand, a silver Ringa simple replica of the ruby that once brought down an empire. Lily smiled. She opened the drawer, pulled out the old wooden box, and looked one last time at the blood-red stone. Then she closed it and left it on the shelf. Not to forget, but to place the past where it belongs. She returned to her desk, where the first designs were forming for a new kind of school. One without walls of genetics, expectations, or chains of blood. It would be called the Clare Center for Children Who Refuse to be Defined. Sometimes, to bring down an entire empire, you don't need a grand revolution. All it takes is a little girl standing in the middle of a fabricated world, daring to ask, who am I, if I'm not what others have decided I must be? Lily wasn't born to destroy. She was simply born to exist, truly, wholly, as herself. But that very existence, innocent, brave, and unwilling to surrender, was enough to unravel one of the most elaborate deceptions of our time. Preston Blake believed he could manipulate life itself. He created Project Gemini believing that blood could speak for us, that intellect could be engineered, that emotions could be programmed. But he forgot one thing. What makes us human isn't our genes. It's choice. Claire Cartera, woman without power, titles, or wealth, did the one thing no one else dared. She protected a life from those who thought we could be designed. Charlotte Therese, as a symbol of control, chose to dismantle every structure built around her. She chose truth, even when it meant losing everything she thought was safe. Ethan, the chosen heir, refused to be a pawn and became the spark for change. And Lily, the child, taken from where she was born, became the one who lit a flame for all the forgotten souls still waiting in the dark.